24. It has taken me a couple days, hasn't it, to get you a condensed version of what I last talked about when I was most recently in my classroom, E339. That's last Wednesday. And of course we had Veterans Day off, so there's only two lessons from last week. And this is the second one, and there'll only be two this week coming up because I got a poetry reading. Anyway, let's just try to make something happen here. I don't think I'm going to need you for a half an hour, which is typically what these have been running. First up, I do have a poetry reading Wednesday of this week, and it's in the Chalberg. And you know what would be really fun is if at least one of you from my fully online asynchronous class just came up to me at the reading and said, "Hey, I'm so-and-so, I'm in your online class." And I'm just getting to know you people, and I know that for some of you that's impossible, right? One of you's way up by Nevis, that'd be a long drive. Pine River Bacchus is a destination or home for one of you. One of you's up in Duluth, one of you is in Greece. So for anyone who can't make it, who's got work, whatever, I will post up the live feed in D2L so you can watch it. Videography is going to be there with multiple cameras taking shots of the crowd and basically filming that poetry reading. And it'll stay up on YouTube or Facebook, so you can, YouTube actually, so you can watch it whenever you want. Give it, when you get the link, give it just a few minutes. Give it a try. You might be surprised. It might take a hold of you. So I'd like to start out with a Chris Abani poem, and then I'm only going to be able to give you the gist of what happened in my classroom with my other Comp 1s, which we got to keep in sync. Sometimes it's going to be close, other times it's just going to be kind of me within striking range, an approximation, especially when what's being achieved in the class is being achieved through authentic face-to-face discussion. And we had one. Even my quiet class was speaking up last week. And I was happy about that. A little heads up, we're turning towards F. Scott Fitzgerald now. I took a look at, maybe I told you this already, I took a look at that story, Spotted Horses by Faulkner, and you've read enough. A Rose for Emily and Barn Burning is enough. F. Scott Fitzgerald's Great Gatsby awaits. I'll put up an assignment in D2L on that. And then we've got Thornton Wilder and maybe even more writers before Christmas, although we got fragmentation ahead. So let me just get going at 2 minutes after. Chris Abani's latest book is called Smoking the Bible. A little bit of a sacrilegious title, or maybe not. I've only read about half the poems in it. This poem is it's a collection of poems that explore the relationship between two brothers, one elegizing the other. An elegy is a serious lyric poem, often written for someone who's sleeping in the earth. And it's really a beautiful book of poetry from a beautiful press, Copper Canyon Press. And I'll start, it's just a very short poem by Chris Abani. It's called Cameo, : brooch. Outside, snow travels in unhurried drifts. Inside, the overheated train, fog shrouds the dirty window, drawing mottled patterns. A second landscape of impermanence and breath. With a finger, I trace a cameo, not unlike the brooches mother wore high on the neck. You were always her favorite, the best of us. How to broach influence, how to speak of us without speaking of father and mother. A swath of light falls across the tray table. An ant trembles under the weight of the bright. I fold an origami bird, think of hand-rolled cigarettes made from Bible pages, suddenly given flight by flame, egrets immolated in the burn. Well, I hadn't read that poem at least to the end yet, and that's where that business of smoking the Bible comes from, which I wouldn't do that. Yeah, that'll be me Tuesday, about 1 o'clock at the Minneapolis airport, the big one. Standing there, I always make these crap cardboard signs because, Abani is what it'll say, because they don't know what I look like, even though I know what they look like, and I know all kinds of things about them because I've been reading their poetry and their memoir. Okay, to just cut to where we arrived at about the 15-minute mark last Wednesday, I asked my captive charges at my 9 o'clock and my 10 o'clock class, okay, answer me this. Can anybody name a musician that you're fond of, whose music you're devoted to? Right now, I just want to hear the names. And pretty much the class, both classes, but particularly with the 10 o'clock class, devolved into, okay, how out of it can we make him feel, right? And they just started naming all these artists that I just never heard of, knew nothing about. And of course, I closed off that whole section by saying, asking them, why aren't you listening to the greatest band in America? It's Wilco, W-I-L-C-O. And I don't care if those guys are getting old. They're the greatest rock and roll band we got right now, and nobody had heard of them. So I made them feel out of it. I made them feel like fossils. Then the questions got a little bit more serious. I'm like, okay, do you know anything about this artist that you just named? Do you know anything personal about them? And a few people were able to talk about artists, musicians that they were devoted to, and little minutiae, little bits of, yeah, well, they're married, they own a ranch, they've done this in terms of philanthropy. And then I drew, actually this was already drawn up on the board. Now it's kind of a crap diagram, but I wanted to segue from them talking about music to talking about the idea of having a relationship with a writer. But it doesn't have to just be a writer. It can be any artist. It can be a sculptor. It could be a painter, someone dancing. It could be an opera. It could be anything. Any art form or any kind of artist can be plugged into this model for the sake of wondering. And then the question became, okay, just take Hemingway as the example. I've told you a number of things about him. Is there anyone in here who cares about that? And they weren't quite sure what I was up to yet. But I started saying things like, okay, look, I told you that he owned 4 homes. I told you that he was married 4 times. I told you about the things that he liked to eat and drink. I told you that he was a hunter and a fisher. I told you that he won the Nobel Prize, that he shot himself, that he fathered sons, that he left behind a shelf of books for all of us. Is there anyone in here for whom that matters? And now the hands are flickering a little bit, and they're like, okay, yeah, that matters. I like to know those things about an artist, especially if it manifests in the art. And then I flipped the question. I said, is there anyone in here who doesn't care? And I'm thinking of one class in particular, Mia Rose Severson, put her hand up. I think I've mentioned her before. It goes up pretty quickly before the others sometimes. Well, the answer was kind of and also not really. And I said, look, it's an either-or thing. You don't have to commit. Or if you commit, you may change your mind later. It's a simple question. Do you have an interest in the identity of the artist? Or might you just want the art? We could do the same thing with Chris Abani. I've told you, he's a big guy. He's from Nigeria. He went to jail. He writes about the human heart. He's a teacher. On and on and on. Do those things matter to you? Or might you just want the poems, separate from the writer? Just the painting, just the sculpture, just the tapestry, and plug in any work of art you want. And we had a pretty decent discussion about that. Then I asked a question about this. Intention, aim. Does what the writer intended with whatever it is they've created, does that matter to you? Does it? Well, now they wanted to play the game. We got more conversation was stirred about this, and this is a basic question about meaning. Where does meaning reside? Does meaning reside in the mind of the artist? Does it reside in the mind of the viewer, someone reading the book or looking at the painting, whatever, etc., etc.? Or does it lie somewhere in between? Now, when I get back to that classroom tomorrow, I'm going to make this a little bit more complicated, and I'll have a follow-up video for you, because however they answer that question, it has to do, it classifies them as readers. And there were some women, particularly off to my left in my 10 o'clock class, that were really like, you know what, who cares? Who cares about the artist? Let's just give us the book. And I let them know something very gently and truthfully. If you just want the book, if you just want that book of poetry, just the form, the work of art, you are a very modern thinker. In the olden days, we really, really cared. And I do care, and I go back and forth. But generally, I'm kind of obsessed with the writer. I want to know what they ate for breakfast. I want to know everything about them, and I'll talk about that more later. that's me. And if that's not you, we can still be friends and love each other, at least be friends. And I let them know, you are very modern. In fact, we haven't even really been thinking about this since the 1920s. Another way of thinking of readers classifying themselves is by how much ambiguity, how much difficulty they can tolerate. And I was amazed how many people in their journal entries, I haven't read yours yet for this last round, but I've got maybe 10 notebooks left over in my guest house. I don't think I've ever seen so many students prefer Faulkner over Hemingway. And now we're on to a third great writer, F. Scott Fitzgerald, one of our own, born on Summit Avenue in St. Paul. There I go again, talking about the writer. But that can keep until tomorrow. When I get to my E339 tomorrow, I'll be offering my students a presentation on F. Scott Fitzgerald. Not a text-heavy PowerPoint with lots of bullet points that I turn and read. I love showing images in classes and lessons. That's what I want on the big screen. Why would you put something on a screen and then turn and read it to your students? I love photographs. I love paintings. I love diagrammed ideas. So to review, one thing to review. If you're in the Brainerd Lakes region, if you can get away, my poetry reading starts at 11 o'clock, although I'll be kicking it off with a brunch with a couple of former students of mine who are now PhDs. They're joining me, including Guni Senenge Nzenge, Dr. Senenge Nzenge. He's the only Nigerian I could find for miles. He's coming up from the cities. That brunch is going to be at 11. The poetry reading is going to be at noon. And after the poetry reading, there'll be a book signing. If you can find $17, you could buy this book and have Chris sign it. And I can't wait to get his autograph on mine. And here's something I really want to pitch, and this is my last thing I want to say to you. This will be under 14 minutes or so here. One of the great things that I don't sell enough is the last event with every Verse Like Water reading that I have, and that's called a craft talk. The craft talk is always at about 1:30. It features the writer. I bring them down off the stage. I put a lavalier mic on like I'm wearing, and I get them a music stand, and they usually sit on the stage and just kind of hold court. And that's usually 50, 60, 70 people. And I can promise you this, the craft talks are sometimes as amazing as the poetry reading. That happened with Kwame Dawes. Was he a genius when he gave his reading a year ago? A dear friend of Chris Abani? Absolutely. But it was even more magical to get closer to him and watch him go into professor mode, because inevitably they are all teachers of genius. I strongly encourage you to come to that. You'll get the same extra credit, significant extra credit, that I will give to any of my students who make the craft talk. The reason why I'm saying that is because the poetry reading is dang near full. So if you want to go to that poetry reading at noon in the Chalberg, come early, okay? 6 high schools are coming. I already told you that. Pine River, Bacchus, Pillager, Crosby, Royalton, Aiken, Long Prairie Gray Eagle, 6 schools and all. I probably spaced off one of them. At least think about it. I'm having another poetry reading. February 24th. I probably won't be your teacher then, though. I've already got a full slate of classes for the spring. Hope to see you at the poetry reading. If just one of you came, it would just make my day. And maybe I'll get you on the news. Lakeland Public Television, I'm going to be there shooting all kinds of B-roll before they interview me and Professor Abani. I'm famous on TV, too. Okay, you guys stay well. It's cold. It's dang cold. I can see my neighbor's horse in the distance. Good news, and I'll be telling my students this tomorrow to give them words of fair encouragement. We got a warm-up coming at the end of the month. Thanksgiving week, we only meet once that week, Monday. Whole rest of the week is off, and about Saturday of Thanksgiving weekend, we're going to climb back up into the 30s and 40s for a couple of weeks. I already checked it, and I already prayed about it to make the matter certain. Section 24, I'll be at you, and it's going to be tomorrow, too, because Tuesday I go into poet hosting mode. So I'll get right back to this desk tomorrow, and I'll give you a compilation, a condensation of what I do tomorrow in E339, and I'll think of that soon.